welcome again to this webinar from the Parent Encouragement Program about how to manage morning mayhem and beat bedtime battles. I'm Dara Kessler, and it is absolutely my pleasure and honor to be here to share some tactics and tools that have worked really well for me and my family and the families that I've worked with over the years. So I would like to invite you to continue entering into the chat the ages of your children, where you're tuning in from, and I'd love to hear some of the challenges that it motivated you to sign up to be here tonight. But I'm here with the Parent Encouragement Program, which you're going to hear me referring to as PEP. Because PEP's programs offer guidance and support and strategies so that we can, as parents, we can foster a home environment where our kids know that they belong, that they are safe to make mistakes, and mistakes actually present an opportunity to learn, where we create homes that engender a sense of belonging and resilience, which lends itself to having confidence to do hard things and to work as a team to solve problems. Our middle name is encouragement because we know that when we feel better, we do better. And that's not just for kids, that's for grown-ups too. And when our families collectively feel encouraged, we tend to see less unwanted behavior, like the morning rush that's happening, or some of the evening routine challenges that we hear about. We see less of that and more cooperation. So it's my real genuine hope that by slightly maybe tweaking our mindset and with more tools at our disposal, like what we're going to look at tonight, that all of us will enjoy more cooperation, more peace, and more satisfaction in our family lives. I'm so confident that you're going to like what you have to hear, that you're going to want to learn more. And so here's some offerings that PEP has. At 8 o'clock tonight, we're offering a webinar on tackling technology. None of this content is to be missed. I'm telling you, all of this is really smart, forward thinking. We'll give you tools that you can deploy right away. So we have these live webinars, tackling technologies later tonight, later in March. We have a webinar on kids and anxiety, and also to communicating with our teens and tweens for those of us with older kids. PEP also offers 4-week master classes. They are offered on a monthly rolling basis. They're interactive. You have an opportunity to learn the material and then experiment with it in the laboratory of your home, and then come to the classroom setting to talk about how it went, what could be tweaked, what can you learn from the other parents. And I'm going to stick this into the chat, but we also have a relatively new offering, the PEP Family Resiliency Program, which is an 8-week program for parents that's free, and it's for parents to support our children's mental wellness, resiliency, and success in school. And the spring session for this free 8-week class begins April 21st. I've stuck the links in the chat, so by all means, I encourage you to explore all of the different resources that PEP has to offer. So here's the roadmap for our time together this evening. I'm going to start by diving into some ground rock principles that PEP is built on. We're going to look at why morning and evening tends to be so tricky. And one of the major dynamics that comes into play is power struggle. So we'll look at that more deeply. We're going to talk about how we can reduce stress. One of the ways we can reduce stress is by establishing routines. So we're going to talk about establishing routines, why that's important, and how to do so. We'll review some tips for success. And then I'm happy to take questions as they come. So you're welcome to enter questions into the chat, and we can look at them as we go, but there's also going to be time at the end for questions. And I'm curious, or I'm optimistic, that by having our time together mapped out, I'm hoping that you're feeling a little bit more calm and confident and comfortable, a little bit more secure knowing we're going to wrap up by 7, a little bit more comfortable knowing there's time for questions. And if you have an urgent question, you can stick it into the chat and we'll do our best to address it. Our brains typically like structure and knowing what to expect. And this is a resource we can offer to our kids to help them show up more confidently. So that was just a little try it on for size. So PEP is grounded in these ideas and these principles. One is respect. And respect is going to land on each of us a little bit differently, and we each get to deploy respect in the laboratory of our families in the way that makes most sense. But for our purposes tonight, the idea is that all beings, regardless of age or size or background, are entitled to be treated with respect and dignity, that we are all eminently lovable and worthy of love and belonging. That is just a bedrock principle. Another major principle here at PEP is that we're going to focus on effort and progress. There is a predisposition and propensity to focus on the things that aren't going right. We tend to latch on like lasers to what's going wrong and the shortcomings. And I'm going to invite you to really make an effort to focus on progress and improvement, or not even improvement, progress or effort or just showing up. That is a really encouraging stance. And then another important principle is this idea of appreciating contribution. We all want to make sure that we are all valued, that we notice what our kids are doing that's contributing and how valuable they are. We're social beings after all. So we all need to know that we belong and that we can contribute. And you'll notice that these principles are embedded in the tools that I will be sharing tonight. All right, so let's ground this conversation in why morning and bedtime routines can times, not necessarily routines, but times can present such a challenge. I think one of the biggest ingredients is that it's such a transition. Kids have to typically separate from their caregivers, and that can be really anxiety inducing, whether that's in the morning at a drop off or at night and going to sleep. It's anxiety inducing to separate from your caregiver. And it's busy. There's so much to do. We have to get dressed and brush our teeth, or our kids, we collectively have a lot to do in the mornings to get out the door, make sure our things are all ready, make sure that our lunch is prepared, that we've had a good, healthy breakfast. And the same goes at night as well. Getting our homework done and getting ready for bed and allowing time to wind down. So all of that busy transition can lend itself to being challenging. Another challenge is that I'm sure I'm not the only one who's showing up tonight a little bit maybe not so adequately rested, and maybe a little stressed from everything that I've had to deal with today heretofore. So without adequate rest and while under stress, us parents are working against the clock to get out the door on time or to keep things together and peaceful at night. And that is hard. So I want to honor that and name it and just know that none of us are alone in this. And the other major element that we come up against is that there can be a loss of control. And that loss of control will often roll out as a power struggle. And I want to define a power struggle as being when a child wants to do something and an adult wants to do something different, and those things don't mesh. And the urge and the instinct is for the adult to try to make the kid do what they want to do, what they need them to do. And that's what triggers a power struggle. It's like a tug of war. If you have a particularly headstrong child, it can be a battle of the wills. And I just want us to recognize as parents, we have this capacity to, and maybe a propensity to throw down the gauntlet of a power struggle by saying things like, you need to get in the bath now, or you need to put your shoes on right now. Do you see how that's like throwing a rope right at them? And so that you're inviting, I don't want to, I don't have to, you can't make me, you can't make me. So this is what I'm referring to when we're talking about the dynamic of a power struggle. I would love to hear in the chat if this rings true, if this is something that you're experiencing in your home, and what does it look like? What are the pain points when you're trying to get out the door, trying to get kids to bed? What is the power dynamic looking like? It's almost a ubiquitous issue that we have these power struggles, and they can be enormously trying. So one suggestion that it's not on the slide, but that I'm gonna just want you to make note of, is that when you notice that you're on the path to that tug of war, and it might, by the way, show up as kids dawdling. Kids might be taking their time. That is their way of exerting control. That is another way of exerting control. It might look like kids ignoring you. So it might not be like the typical battle of the wills, but it can be a quiet, silent battle of the wills. But when you're noticing that this might be in progress, us as the adults have the capacity to perhaps sidestep the power struggle. We can refuse to even pick up that rope. Okay, so let's see. Not getting a ton. Oh, okay. My fourth grader has a list of things to do when it's bedtime. Okay, cool. So it sounds like we have some ways to get ahead of the power struggle. Hopefully, by having a list of things to do, you're setting your fourth grader up, because we're going to talk about this later. You're setting them up to know what they are in store for. And so that's helping to sidestep our power struggles. Okay, so when it comes to if we've inadvertently engaged in trying to make our kids do something when it's not what they're wanting to do, what we can do in that moment is to drop the rope. And by that, I mean, we can express to our kids something to the effect of, I love you too much to fight. And in this house, we don't yell. So I'm going to give myself a positive timeout. And we literally, because typically what happens when we're in the midst of a power struggle is we're not working with our fully resourced brain. And so it's an opportunity, we can take the opportunity to give ourselves a positive timeout, breathe, get some oxygen to our brain so that we can get back into a creative, resourceful spot, and then circle back with our kids to say, okay, if we've raised our voice or we've behaved in a way that's not the highest representation of who we are, then we can take the opportunity to model apologizing and making it right. Like, in this house, we don't yell, and I should not have raised my voice with you, and I apologize for that. And I'm going to make every effort to speak with you in a non-shouting voice. Okay, so those are some tips and things that we can do to diffuse if we find ourselves in a power struggle. But here at PEP, we also have webinars that specifically and solely address power struggles. Because, as I said, it's a dynamic in basically every family. So it might be worth a deep dive to learn more about the dynamics of why power struggles start, and then more tools to in terms of how to address them in the moment, and also how to sidestep them and avert them from happening. Not that you can completely avert them, but you can start seeing less and less power struggles. Okay. Let's look at, now that we've taken apart a little bit this power dynamic, let's look at other ways that we can reduce stress. And one of those ways is by focusing on what we call at PEP the needs of the situation. So what can happen, it's very typical that we can get hung up on all of these little things, all these details that in the moment may not really matter. And we can take the opportunity as the grown-ups to drill down and get really clear on what it is that is important. What is actually the need of the situation? If we were to crystallize this morning into its innermost part, that might look like the need of the situation in the morning is to get out the door at a certain time so that everyone can start their day promptly. Right, so we can go from, in the morning, we need to do A, B, C, D, E, Z, and to J, and to Z rather. But if we're really clear, what we need to do is get out the door in the morning. What we need to do is make sure our kids are learning the responsibility of healthy sleep habits and getting themselves ready on time and getting food in their bellies or having some provision for a meal. I'm seeing in the chat that are there different approaches for neurodivergent kids? Yes, there are different approaches for neurodivergent kids, and I am not an expert in them, but I will turn you to the PEP website where there is a library of on-demand videos, and Jen Dreyer has a lot of very smart things to say about how we can deploy these tactics that are respectful, like we spoke about at the beginning, that are grounded in encouragement and in a way that takes into account our kids' different neuro backgrounds. Thank you for putting that website back into the chat. So when we focus on the needs of the situation, that can really help us to let go of some of the stress that we have. At night, the needs of the situation might look like child and parent get enough sleep. It could look like, for little ones, that we want to make sure that our children, our little ones, are learning how to sleep by themselves successfully. And with older kids, the needs of the situation might look like supporting their healthy sleep habits, making sure that they're in their bedrooms for at least 8 hours-ish, and that there's some sort of control for electronics, so that there's some agreed upon way that we're going to handle electronics at night, because as we all know, using electronics until the moment we close our eyes disrupts our sleep. And the need of the situation at night is healthy, adequate, restful sleep. So if mornings and evenings are not working smoothly, one of the things that you can do is really go back to the needs of the situation, focus on those first. When it comes to planning ahead, that's another way we can reduce stress, right? So when we think ahead and we know we are going to want to eat lunch, so perhaps we can think about what we can do collectively as a family to get our lunches prepared for the following day, or how we're going to get our activity bags or our homework sorted out in such a way. Ostensibly the night before, so that the morning can run as smoothly as possible. If you notice you have a kid who routinely forgets something at home, or they routinely wake up late, or and so late that they're not able to eat breakfast, you might consider starting by noticing the effect on the child and giving them some real-time feedback in a respectful, mutually respectful way, right? So that might sound something like, oh, I noticed how cranky you were this morning when we rushed out the door and there wasn't enough time for breakfast. I know how hangry I get sometimes. What do you think about brainstorming some options so that it's better next time? I hope you notice that embedded in that was some empathy. We're empathizing with our child. We're showing that we're on the same team with them, the getting out the door on time team. And we're offering to brainstorm with them. We are resisting the urge. I know it's certainly my urge to launch into a complaint session and rail into them like, how many times do I have to tell you, we need to get out the door on time, and you see you missed breakfast this morning and now how cranky you were. We can transmit that very same message, but in an inviting way, and in a way that actually invites the child to solve their own problems. Speaking of problem solving, there's another great on-demand video about problem solving as a family. So when it comes to protecting our sleep, just like planning ahead for bedtime, we need to plan ahead for bedtime to ensure enough sleep. And so that entails allowing enough time for winding down as well. And as I alluded to before, a key aspect to this is having some sort of screen usage policy in your home. The latest guidance that I read is not to be in front of a screen for an hour before you intend to sleep. And that can be hard, especially with older kids, with homework, or with our own workloads. It can be challenging. So if that's just simply not doable, there's another potentiality, which is to reduce the light settings, or to not reduce, but to manipulate the light settings on your phones and your computers. And this is a really fun activity with your older kids, because they can probably teach you how to change the settings so that they will be more healthy for sleep. And because this information holds true for us adults too. So I'm going to encourage you and everyone in your family to have some sort of screen time. If you're not able to remove your screens an hour before bedtime, if you're not able to turn them off, then to use the lighter settings, and also to consider removing your screens from your bedrooms entirely, because we all function better when we're well rested. And finally, another way that we can reduce stress and help with the busy transition times is by establishing routines with our kids. I hope you notice that I'm saying establishing routines with your kids. I'm not suggesting that we come up with awesome routines and then we force our kids to do them. That wouldn't be respectful, like we talked about in the, earlier. So I would love to hear in the chat, although it sounds like someone already got ahead of this, but okay. I would love to hear in the chat, what are some routines that have helped in your home? Or how have you found ways to set up routines that work for your family? Let's talk while we're waiting for people to think about routines that they've set up, why routines matter. And I alluded to this when we reviewed the agenda and I gave you the roadmap for the evening. What our brains are wired to prefer predictability. When we know what's going to happen next, then that helps us to feel safe and secure, so we can kind of sit back and trust that others are going to do what they say what they say, and that our world is a predictable and trustworthy place. Routines also help kids learn to take charge of their own belongings and their own activities. Routines help kids to get and stay on schedule. And because the routine becomes the boss, the routine helps to eliminate those power struggles that we were referring to. So how do we go about co-creating and establishing routines together, right? So I'm going to reiterate that this is, in as much as it is attractive because we are wise and we have all of this experience and we could certainly download the routine and then try and force our kids to do it, that is only going to engender more power struggles. So the opportunity and the invitation is to co-create a routine with our kids. And one entree to do that is by naming the problem. And before I go into this, I'm just noticing that Sally noted that she lets her toddler sort of choose when her bath time is. Is it going to be when we get home, or is it going to be before we get to bed? And part of the routine includes a puzzle or a book before bed because she loves them. I love that, Sally. I love that we know that a bedtime needs to happen, a bath needs to happen, but we're giving the kids some agency in terms of when that happens. And that agency, that capacity to have a voice and a say in what happens, is a deposit of encouragement into your toddler's bank account of encouragement. And when kids feel encouraged, like I alluded to at the beginning of our time together, they tend to show up more cooperatively, and we tend to see less unwanted behavior. Patricia is saying, our son loves books. So instead of choosing for him, we let him pick. The experience has improved a lot, and his little face lights up. That's right. Because like any self-respecting human, we want to have some choice. And so the more we can embed choice into our day and into our routines, the more encouraged everyone is going to collectively feel, the more cooperation, the less unwanted behavior. Thank you. So when it comes to establishing those routines, Okay, let's see. Routines that include rewards and flexibility. Our son asked if he could have a later bedtime if he agreed to walk the dog in the morning. Yes. So when our kids have a vested interest, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Thank you so much, Everett, for making manifest exactly what I'm attempting to describe here, that we want to enroll our kids, get their voice in the matter, and they will think of things that we may not have imagined. And I love that. I think that that's so empowering and encouraging. So we can open the bidding by naming the problem, bedtime too late, or no breakfast because we were late getting out the door. Please notice how hopefully you can see that that just lands really respectfully versus you overslept again, or you went to bed too late again. We're keeping kids out of the problems and we're just naming the problems without any people. So once we've named the problem, bedtime was, and by the way, we want to do this. We want to set up the setup for routines at a time where bellies are full and there's time to spare and it's a relatively calm time. I know in my house, typically Sunday afternoons would work well. I used to put a plate of M&M cookies to tantalize kids to the table, but maybe it's a plate of broccoli, whatever works for your house, but just to be thoughtful, like, okay, I want to have this important conversation. What is going to be the most inviting way, and what timing and location are going to set myself up for success? So over a plate of cookies at a calm time, so bellies are full, we're going to talk about like this bedtime too late situation. And then we hear from each other. And we might learn that the bedtime might have been too late in my book, but there might have been an explanation for it. And I think it's so vital for our kids to know that their voices matter and we have space for this. And then we stay neutral. We ask lots of open-ended curiosity questions. We listen more than we speak. And we ask, and we open the table and we open the floor for brainstorming. What else is possible? How are we going to make this work so that we get out the door or we get to bed in a timely fashion that works for everybody? And as the grown-ups, we're the ones who are responsible for holding this container, for setting the limits. We might have some pens and paper available or some sort of way to list everything that needs to be done. And then, based upon what we talked about in terms of the needs of the situation, let's pare that list down. Let's make sure it's really only what's mission critical. And we're going to hand over to the child the responsibility of creating the final list. Now, the 2-year-old is not going to be able to create their final list. Okay, so from what age is this realistic and possible? Thank you, KSK. So that's going to be contingent upon your child. I co-created a list with my boys when they were quite young. They were probably 3 and 5. I basically cribbed something that I saw in one of their preschools that I thought was pretty cool. So I copied it and I mainly got their agreement, but I mechanically made the list. But I got it with their cooperation and their agreement, and it was all familiar to them because, as I said, I used images that I saw in their preschool. And then as they got older, they got more and more input until they were driving their routines. So I'm sorry, I don't have an exactly specific age, but I would say starting at age 4, certainly your kid can have input into the list and they can decorate it and you can co-decorate it. But in terms of if you're looking for writing anything, that's the parent, an adult will probably need to help a little bit. And you're going to want to allow plenty of time for space and experimentation. I want to share this slide because it's an example of a routine chart, but we all likely have access to a wealth of resources. And especially if you have older kids, I would turn to them for their creativity and resourcefulness in terms of how they want to capture their routine. I've seen all sorts of interesting devices, including like those things that you hang over your door handle with laundry clips. So if something's been done, instead of a check mark, you move the laundry clip to the other side of the I'm doing a terrible job describing this, but hopefully you have a visual of the door hanging paper. But that part doesn't matter. That part you get to be as creative and resourceful as you want to be, or as plain and simple as you want to be. You want to keep the list relatively simple. It can get more complicated as the kids get older. But I would suggest, for the purposes of staying encouraged, that you set yourself up for success by choosing 3 to 5 items maximum, and you're creating this with your child, as I keep emphasizing. And they take the lead on how it works best for them to use it. But what's super cool about the routine is that gets to be the boss, and you get to fire yourself from being the nag or the reminder or the person always chasing everyone down. Now you get to use some nonverbal communication and point to the list, and maybe point to your watch or make a questioning expression. But now you're really preserving your energy to take care of your own business. You can ask open-ended questions like, I wonder what you're going to choose to do next, or what does the chart say? But we're really letting the chart and the routine be the boss at this point. And like I mentioned before, one of PEP's principles is that we make friends with mistakes. We know that they're going to happen, and we want everyone to feel safe that mistakes will happen. So we bake that into the system. And like I mentioned before, we're going to be making sure that we're putting our attention not on the mistakes, but rather we are watering the behavior, however small it might be, however small that progress might be. That is where we are attending our attention. So we're looking at progress and effort. Okay, so I'm seeing a question in the chat. I can't get my kids to adhere to a routine unless they earn stickers or screen time. Otherwise, they totally ignore it. How do we get the intrinsic motivation just to follow through? I'm afraid I don't remember the ages of your kids. Do you mind entering that into the chat, please? 6 and 8. Okay, so 6 and 8-year-olds are pretty capable beings. So one wondering I have is, or one possibility is around, I would really invoke their voices. I would really want to know, like, what do they think? What do they want their routine to? I'm guessing that or curious about how much choice and voice your kids had in putting together their routine. And if they're not adhering to it unless they're extrinsically rewarded, I would turn that back to them. Like, what needs to happen for this routine so that it happens naturally on its own? I know that you're capable. I know that you're courageous. I know you have what it takes. It's also an opportunity to be curious around, well, what do you need to learn? If it's a matter of preparing breakfast, what would you like to learn how to make? What do we mechanically need to be prepared? Remember, we talked about thinking ahead, planning ahead. So if your kids like a grab and go meal, what does that look like? Is that yogurt? Is that string cheese so that there's plenty of protein? That's when we start talking about macronutrients, how important nutrition is. So there's lots of training that we can embed in this routine conversation that we have with our kids. So when it comes to embracing mistakes, I also want to mention that we want to think about, while we're focusing on effort, not on what isn't working, that we know that mistakes are going to happen, and it's possible that your daughter is going to forget her homework in her bag, or your son is going to leave his lunch in the fridge. And I'm here to suggest that we collectively as parents resist the very natural urge to rescue our kids, because as soon as we swoop in, we are accidentally teaching them the lesson that they really don't have to do it. The parents we're going to take care of it for them. Or we're tacitly transmitting the message that we don't believe that they're capable of handling their own problems. And at least my experience and observation has been, in my own family and in speaking to parents who have been courageous enough to allow their kids to endure the natural consequences of forgetting their homework or forgetting their lunch, they're less likely to forget again when they've experienced the natural consequence of the goof up. Okay, and just as importantly, when they do mess up, zip it. That's a very important parenting tactic, is just keeping our mouth shut. As soon as we start to talk about it, lecture them about it, how many times have I told you about it? The focus goes away from learning that juicy life lesson, and now we're jerks. Now the focus is on how our parents are such jerks. You can empathize. Empathy is a very luscious parenting tool. You might say something like, that sounds lousy. We can listen. We can ask open-ended curiosity questions like, so what'd you do when you realized you forgot your lunch? I wouldn't have thought of that. You can respond as encouragingly as possible. And you can mirror back to them, I really appreciate that you solved your own problem. And then you can later, at a time where they need to solve their own problem, you can harken back like, oh, you managed when you forgot your lunch that one time. You know how to solve your own problems. I'm curious what you're going to do in this situation. You can also offer how you might ask how they'll choose to do things differently the next day, and you can offer to brainstorm with them if that's helpful. But again, this all focuses on their effort and affirms their contributions. Okay, so all this said, slight caveat. There are times when your kid is, generally speaking, remembering her homework and remembering their lunch, and there is a real oops, and they forget something, especially if it's something important. I'm not suggesting to shut down ever helping your kid out, but I am suggesting not to rescue on a regular basis. If there's a one-off and it's particularly important, there was one time he was then in 4th grade, and generally speaking, he had his stuff with him and together and was relatively responsible. And he was participating in some sort of homework parade. And what I remember is he had made a sandwich board, and his word was scrumptious. Isn't that a cute word? And he forgot his little scrumptious sandwich board that he had made. So I drove the scrumptious sandwich board to school for him. But that's a one-off rare occasion. So I do want to mention that. My 10-year-old daughter would have no qualms forgetting her lunch because she can buy from school. Well, whose money is she buying it with? I wonder. Right? So there are ways we can tether privilege. You have the privilege of buying the lunch. You have the responsibility of earning the money for it. Okay. I am going to now invite you to enter in the chat. I'm hoping that you have at least one juicy takeaway from everything that we've spoken about. I would love to hear in the chat, what is something that squared with your thinking, like, I knew that made sense to me, or what's something that was like, aha, or what was like an aha light bulb moment, I'd never thought about it this way, or what is something that you just can't wait to try as soon as you get off the call tonight. Some of the takeaways we typically hear about, parents are really excited about the invitation, the permission to drop the rope. Many parents appreciate being walked through how to establish routines with their kids. And I know a lot of parents like the idea of focusing on what goes well. We've never actually written down a routine. I think a visual would really help, especially in the morning. Sally, I hope it will. I trust it will. Patricia saying when we should put our kids' routines together with them instead of for them. I'm going to encourage all of us to take this thinking and deploy it across everything. Make our lunches with our kids, teach our kids to make their own lunch. Everything that we can do, the more we can co-create, co-decide, again, the more connected our kids are going to feel, the less unwanted behavior, the more cooperation that we're going to see. Before I open the floor for questions, I'm going to reiterate the resources again. I'm going to put these into the chat once again because you can't get these enough. I have alluded to some of the on-demand videos. We have videos on healthy sleep habits, on setting limits, on power struggles, on family problem solving. Again, how do we co-create an answer to a problem? It's so fun. And then here's a list of awesome books. I can't recommend one over another. They're all just fantastic.